Welcome back. So today is our final lecture for algorithm design, and we're going to talk about a new problem which is quite important in practice, which is the problem of string matching. Okay, so let me first introduce the problem and give the motivation. So suppose you're given a text T. Okay, so you can think of T as like a very large string, and now you're given another string S, and you want to find whether S is in T or not, whether S is contained in T. Okay, and so S is often called a pattern, and so we're trying to find whether a given pattern, is inside the text. So for example, if T equals the word prefix, right, and S equals fix, then S is contained in T. Okay, but if S prime equals 6, right, then S prime is not contained in T. Okay, so we've actually seen another algorithm for solving this problem, which is the Rabin-Karp algorithm, right, the randomized algorithm. But today we're going to look at some deterministic algorithms for solving this problem, and these have a number of interesting ideas. Okay, now in terms of applications for this problem, so there are many applications. Okay, so first of all, whenever you write email or you have a word processor or something, right? Then you might need to find whether a certain word is inside of your email or not. Okay, so in that case, the text is going to be your email message, and the string is just the word that you're looking for, right? The pattern is the word. Okay. Likewise, if you have a search engine, right? So search engines are going to crawl over the web, and they're going to pull in lots of web pages, and then they need to search through the web page to see whether a certain query to the search engine, the query word is actually inside of a web page. Okay, you can also use this to detect like plagiarism, right? When people like copy like homeworks and papers and so on. And another very important application for this in practice is in computational biology. So for example, there's a problem called sequence alignment, where you take basically two genomes. Okay, so let's say that you'd have two different people and you sequence their genomes and you want to compare them. Okay, so to compare them, so the genome is represented as a large string, right, of nucleotides, which are the A, T, C, G different nucleotides. Okay, and then to compare them, so one problem that you can, in order to do these comparisons, one thing you can do is to take, let's say, a short snippet from one genome, right, and then see where that snippet occurs in the other genome. Okay, if it occurs somewhere in the other genome, then that gives you a starting place where you can now try to align the two genomes. Okay, so align means that you're going to match up all of the nucleotides from one genome to the other one. Okay, so to do this alignment, you might want a location where to get started, right? Like this is called an anchor location. And to find these anchor locations, you can search for just a small sequence, small DNA snippet from one genome and try to find that in the other genome. And if you can find it, then that provides you a starting spot to do your alignment. Okay, so yeah, so these problems are used a lot in practice, and they're especially important for computational biology, as we'll see in the second part of this lecture. Okay, now to do this, to solve this problem, let's first consider the simplest method for solving this. Okay, but so we're going to see that this is not efficient, but during the course of looking at this algorithm, we're going to get some ideas about how to make this more efficient. Okay, so to look at the simplest brute force algorithm to solve the string matching problem, basically all we need to do is we're going to take S, right, and then compare it against every possible part of T. Okay, so I'll just give you the example below. So in this example, I'm going to color code the letters. Okay, so we have this text T over here, and we're trying to find S inside of T. Okay, so the color coding indicates that whenever you get a match on a letter, I'm going to color that letter in the pattern. I'm going to color that green. Okay, and if you get a mismatch, then I'm going to color the letter red. So for example, suppose that we put S over here. We align S with the start of T. Okay, In that case, the first letter of S and T match, right? They're both A's. Okay, so that's why the A is green. Okay, but then we get a mismatch on the second letter. Okay, so the B is going to be red. Okay, so since we do not get a match of S and T when we place S at this location in T, then we'll just try to place S in the next location in T. Okay, so that means that we're going to just shift S over by one letter to the right. Okay, and then again, we'll try to do the match between S and T. But in this case, we get a mismatch on the very first letter of S. Okay, so there's no match between S and T at this location, but potentially there are still matches somewhere later on. And so therefore, we're going to shift S again, right? And this time when you shift S, right, you're going to get matches on 5 letters. Okay, but you get a mismatch on the 6th letter. Okay, so then we try again. Okay, we get a mismatch on the first letter. We try again, we get, we match 3 letters, but mismatch on the 4th letter, right? We keep trying, and then eventually at this location over here, right, we find that we actually can match all of the letters from S to T. And so that means that S is a part of T. Okay, so this is just the very simple brute force algorithm. Of course, it's going to work correctly, right? So, you know, if after we shifted S through all possible locations of T, if we never found a match, then that means that S is not part of T. Okay, and otherwise, we're going to find a match between S and T at some location where we shift S. Okay, so the problem with this algorithm is that it's too slow. Okay, so for example, if T has a length of n and then S has a length of m, right? And we're going to assume that the string S is going to be smaller than T, right? Or at most the size of T, right? Otherwise, S is definitely not a part of T. Okay, so we're going to assume that S has length m, which is at most n, right? Then whenever you do one of these comparisons that we were looking at, right? So for example, in each of these steps, right, we were comparing all of S against some part of T. Okay, well, to do these comparisons, since S has length m, right, then the comparison at any location of T is going to take order m time. Okay, and then in total, there are m minus m potential locations in T where we need to try to find a match. Okay, so the total number of shifts is m minus m, and so therefore the total running time for the previous algorithm is order m at each shift location times m minus m shifts. So that's going to be order m times n in total. Okay, and usually this is too large in practice. Okay, because for example, let's say that T is like the human genome. Okay, so that's going to have like 3 billion letters in it. Okay, so the 3 billion nucleotides. Okay, and then if you're searching for a pattern, let's say of length, let's say 1,000, right? Then that's going to take you 3 trillion time steps. Okay, and that's just to find one single pattern. Okay, so this is way too slow in practice. Okay, so then the question is, can we make this faster? Okay, so for example, can we run this in order n time? Okay, n is the length of the text. Okay, so instead of 3 trillion time steps, we want to do 3 billion time steps. Okay, now notice that order n is actually optimal, right? So if we don't know anything about T and S, okay, then at the very least, we're going to have to look through all of T. Okay, and that's going to take, in order to find whether S is part of T, we have to, at the very least, look through all of T. And that's going to take order n time. Okay, so if we don't know anything about S and T, right, then order n time is actually optimal. Okay. Now, it turns out that later on, we're going to do something else where we're given in that case, we're given a fixed T. Okay, and then we're allowed to do some pre-processing on the T. Okay, and then we're going to find, after that pre-processing, then we'll be given a bunch of different patterns. Okay, and we want to find whether each of those patterns is in T or not. Okay, in that case, it turns out that when we're looking for these individual patterns, then we can actually go faster than order n time. Okay, but that's because we're allowed to pre-process T. Right, so the pre-processing of T actually takes order n time. Okay, so the pre-processing still has to look through all of T. But then after you pre-process T, you're going to create like a data structure to represent T, and then using that data structure, then future searches for patterns can be faster than order n. Okay, but in the first part of this lecture, we're looking at, we don't know anything about T initially, so we haven't pre-processed T. Okay, in that case, you have to take at least order n time. And so what we're going to do today is to look at the first algorithm we're going to look at is called the KMP algorithm. Okay, so this is named after the three creators, Knuth, Morris, and Pratt. Okay, so this is an order n time algorithm. Okay, so it's an optimal algorithm, and it was proposed in 1977. Okay, so the basic idea for KMP is that now if you think about the brute force algorithm, right? So what happened was that we were trying to match S and T at these various locations. Okay, and we kept on shifting S throughout T, right? And sometimes we actually found a pretty good match between S and T. So for example, over here, right, we managed to match a large part of S and T. Okay. However, as soon as you found the first mismatch, right, then what we did was we actually threw away all this work that we did. Okay, so we matched 5 letters, but as soon as you found one mismatch, you throw all that work away, and then you sort of start over. Okay, you start over at this location. Okay, so basically the intuition behind the KMP algorithm is that we don't want to throw away all the work that we did. If we manage to match a large part of S and T, right, then we want to somehow make use of the work that we've done, make use of that partial match that we found. Okay, so that means that we're not going to start over and move S all the way back. Okay, we're just going to move S back a little bit, and so by doing that, we can actually reuse some of the work that we did on S and T. Okay, so so let me give you an example of this. Okay, so so the basic idea is that it's not necessary to back up as that far. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pre-process S. Okay, we're going to pre-process a pattern, not the text, but the pattern. Okay, and we're going to pre-process it in order to determine the largest amount to back up on a mismatch. Okay, so I think, I've actually got an example later on. Okay, so for example, over here, okay, if we manage to match, a large portion of S and T, okay, then after getting a mismatch on this location between the C and the D, right, the brute force method would simply back up S all the way, and it would start over here. Okay, it would ABC, AB, it would try to do this type of match. Okay. Now, instead, the KMP algorithm is not going to back up S all the way, that far. It's only going to back up S by a few letters. Okay, it's only going to back up S to over here. And then once you do that, then you can actually try to, then you can reuse some of the matches that you established in this ABC portion. Okay. So. Yeah, so more precisely, suppose that you managed to match J letters of S and T. Okay, so in this example, you managed to match 5 letters of S and T. Okay, and so that means that we are processing the Jth letter of S, right? And suppose that the last matching letter of T was the ith letter of T. Okay. So you got this big long string, and this is the ith letter of T, and this is the jth letter of S, and we have a match so far, but we have a mismatch on the next letter. Okay, on the I plus first letter of T, and then on the J plus first letter of S. Okay, then our goal is to not back up all the way. Okay, we don't want to restart like over here, right? ABC, AB. Okay, our goal is to back up a smaller distance. And when you back up by the smaller distance, right? So there are 2 things that we want. Okay, one is that you don't want to back up all the way to this, to this location over here. Oops, to this location over here, because it's wasteful. Okay, On the other hand, you do need to back up S by a few letters. Okay, so what I mean by that is, for example, you cannot just say that, oh, I've got a mismatch over here. Well, then in that case, let me just continue matching over here. Okay, I'm just going to push on ahead, and then I'm going to match S. I'm just going to ignore everything, to the left of this point. Okay, I'm going to ignore that part. I'm just going to start matching, from this portion on. Okay, now we cannot do that. And the reason you cannot do that is if you do that, right, if you don't back up at all, then you can miss a potential match. Okay, so for example, here we backed up S by 2 letters, and potentially there's actually a match between S and T after you back up by 2 letters. Okay, so maybe these letters are indeed A, B, D. Okay, so in that case, after we back up 2 letters, we're going to detect that S and T actually achieve a match at this location. Okay. On the other hand, if you don't back up S at all, okay, if you just push ahead with S, okay, then you're going to miss that match, right? Okay. So this is why you do not want to back up too far because it's wasteful, but you also do not want to back up too little because if you back up too little, you might miss a potential match. Okay. So the key question that the KMP algorithm answers is, how much should we back up each time we get a mismatch? Okay, so then we're trying to figure out this question about how much we're going to back up or backtrack or whatever you want to call this, right? But how much we're going to we're going to shift S backwards. Okay, so now the goal that we want to establish is that if we have a mismatch between the I plus first letter in T and the J plus first letter in S, okay, then what we want to do is to continue the matching at the next letter of T, okay, at the I plus first letter of T, okay, and we're also going to back up S by a certain amount, okay, and that amount is what we want to determine. So, right, and the reason you want to continue matching from location T I plus 1 is because we've already processed T up to the ith letter. Okay, and we don't want to redo any of that work if possible. Right, so we just want to continue with the next letter of T, but potentially we need to back up S by some number of letters. Okay, now suppose we back up S by K letters. Okay, then what do we need to? What property do we need if we want to back S up by K letters? Okay, then what we need is that we need for the first K letters of S to match the last K letters of T before this location T of I plus 1. Okay, this is what I claim we need. Okay, now this is probably quite confusing, that statement. So let me show you the example. Okay, it's actually quite simple what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so what we want to do is we have this match between S and T, right? We have this partial match. Okay, the green part. Okay, and then we have a mismatch on this final letter over here. Okay, now suppose that you back up S by K letters. Okay, in this case we have like K equals 2. Okay, then if you back up S by K letters, you see that if the first 2 K letters of S match the last 2 letters of T before location I plus 1, right? This here is location I plus 1, okay? And you see that the first 2 letters of S match the last 2 letters of T before location I plus 1, okay? Then in that case, we can put S at this location. Okay, we can match up S and T like this. Okay, because these two parts are equal to each other, and so if through the pre-processing that we do on S, okay, if we know that these two parts are equal to each other, then we can simply place S over here. Okay, and then there's no need to match this portion of S and T anymore because we're guaranteed that they match. Okay, so then we can simply continue matching from the next letter of T, which is this letter over here, right? and then also the next letter of S. Okay, so if we know that the first two letters of S matches the last two letters of T, then we're allowed to do this. Okay. Now, in the KMP algorithm, what we instead of matching the the first k letters of S to like some letters to 2k letters from T, what we're going to do is match part of S to itself. Okay. In fact, what we're going to do is if we manage to match 5 letters of S and T in this case, okay, then what we're going to do is to match the first k letters of S to the last k letters of S before the mismatch. Okay, so we got a mismatch over here. Okay, so we only match 5 letters of S. Okay, so therefore we want to match the first 2 letters of S to the last 2 letters of S before the 5th location. Okay, now if these two things match, okay, then I claim that the first 2 letters of S also match the last 2 letters of T before location I plus 1. Okay, and the reason is that well, S and T themselves match, right? Because we managed to match 5 letters of S and T. Okay, so therefore, if we know that, let me erase this stuff. Okay, so if we know that these 2 letters match these 2 letters, and since these 2 things are equal, then we also know that these 2 letters match these 2 letters. Okay, which is what we wanted in order to back up S by just 2 locations. Okay. All right. Yeah. So okay. So this is in the case where the first 2 letters of S, the first k letters of S, actually do match up the last k letters of S before the mismatch location. Okay. Now I claim that you cannot back up. So in that case, we can back up S by k letters. And next, I claim that you don't want to back up S by any more than k letters. Okay, because if you back up S by more than k letters, right? Then then what we know is that, for example, if we know that the first 3 letters of S, okay, do not match the last 3 letters of S before the mismatch location, then there's no point trying to back up S by 3 locations, because we know that if you back up S by 3 locations, right, then what you're going to do is now you're going to take the first 3 letters of S, okay, and if you back up by 3 locations, you're trying to match to this part over here. And we already know that these 2 parts don't match. Okay, and you can see that over here. You can see that they don't match. Okay, so there's no point trying to back up by 3 letters because we know that we're not going to get a match there. Okay, so instead we should only back up by 2 letters. Okay, yeah, so we should back up by 2 letters. Okay. All right, now let's take this idea of matching. All right, so we initially we said that we want to match the first part of S to some part of T. Okay, and then we discovered that it's actually enough to match the first part of S to some other part of S. Okay, that part before the first mismatch. Okay, so now let's take this idea and let's sort of make it more rigorous. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to so suppose that we've already matched J letters of S to J letters of T. Okay, in this case, J equals 5. Okay, now let's let S prime be the first J letters of S. So that's the portion that you matched. Okay. All right, so then what we said is that we want the, in order to back up S by K letters, okay, then what we want is for the first K letters of S to be equal to the last K letters of S prime. Okay, right, so in this case we have that the first 2 letters, right, A, B, are equal to the last 2 letters of S prime. Okay, and in fact, what we want to do is to find the largest, such K. Okay, so if we could, for example, find, 4 letters from S, the first 4 letters of S, if they match the last 4 letters of S prime, right, then we could back up by 4 letters. Okay. Now, in this case, we don't have that. We have that the largest match between the front portion of S and the back portion of S prime only has 2 letters. So in this case, we're only allowed to back up by 2 letters. Okay. Yeah, but we actually want to find the largest K so that the first K letters of S match the last K letters of S prime. Okay, in our example, this is 2. Okay, and then once you find this K, then what you can do is simply back up S by K locations, right? And then after that, you don't need to match these K letters of S to these K letters of T anymore, because we're already guaranteed that they match. And so therefore, you can just continue with the next letter of T and then the next letter of S. Okay? And this tells you why you want to back up S as much as possible. Okay? Because, for example, if we could back up, so let's say that we actually could back up S by 4 letters. Okay? Right? Now we can't. What is this? A B C A B D. Okay. Now in this example, we're not allowed to back up S by 4 letters, right? But suppose that we were able to back up S by 4 letters. In that case, what that would mean is that the these 4 letters of S. Okay. Oops. These first 4 letters of S match these 4 letters of T. Okay. So in that case, you can continue matching from the 5th letter of S and then the I plus first letter of T. Okay, so this means that the further, the more that you back up S, the better. Okay, because then you can continue at a later letter in S. Okay, you can continue from the K plus first letter in S and the I plus first letter in T. Okay, so therefore we are searching for the largest K such that the first K letters of S match the last K letters of S prime. Okay, so now we're going to figure out a way that we can compute this quantity K. Okay, now before we do that, let's just define a few terms. So let's say that a prefix of a string is just the first number, few letters of a string. Okay, so given a string, this string in black over here, right? So all of these blue things, all of these are prefixes. Okay, and the suffixes are just like the final few letters of the string. Okay, so for example, this is a suffix. All of these are suffixes. Okay, yeah. So prefix is a substring including the first letter, and then suffix includes the last letter. Okay, and then a proper prefix or suffix is a prefix or suffix that is shorter than the entire string. Okay, so for example, ABC is it is a prefix and a suffix of ABC. Okay, but it's not a proper prefix because it's not shorter than ABC. Okay, and now let's define this notation over here. Let's say that S of 1I. Okay, so this is going to be the length I prefix of S. So for example, if S is this string over here, right, then S11 is just the length 1 prefix. So that's just the first letter, right? And then S14 is going to be the first 4 letters. Okay. Yeah, and in general, if we have like Sij, okay, so this is going to be the part of S between the ith letter and the jth letter. Okay, so for example, S35 would be this CDC over here. Okay. All right, so now let's use this notation in order to figure out how far we can backtrack in the KMP algorithm. Okay, so the KMP algorithm, it's based on computing this function called a failure function, f. Okay, and this is going to tell us how much to back up each time we have a mismatch between S and T. Okay, so f is going to be a function just on the pattern string, on the string S. Okay, and then this pattern, this function tells us how much to back up each time we get a mismatch. So in particular, suppose we manage to match J letters from S to J letters from T. Okay, but then there's a mismatch on the J plus first letter. Okay, in that case, we're going to back up by F of J letters. Okay, from the mismatch in S. Okay, and then what we saw was that, so what is this F of J? Well, this is going to be equal to the largest K such that the first K letters of S match the last K letters of S before the mismatch location, before this j plus first location. Okay, and what that means is that f of j, so we matched j letters. Okay, right. So if you remember that we defined this thing called what is this? So we well, I thought I defined something called s prime, right? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So this s prime. Okay. Right. So we wanted to match the first j letters of s. First k letters of s to the last k letters of s prime. We wanted to find the largest k possible. Okay, so therefore f of j is going to be equal to the longest matching proper prefix and suffix of this thing over here. Okay, so this is equal to the largest k such that the first k letters of s matches the last k letters of this s prime, this s of 1 to j. Okay, so as an example, if we have this s over here, right? So in this case, our j is going to be 4. So we're looking for the longest matching proper prefix and suffix of this 4-letter part. These 4 green letters over here. Okay, and so we have that this prefix of length 2 matches that prefix that suffix of length 2. Okay, and there's no longer matching proper prefix and suffix. Because, for example, if you look at 3 letters, the 3-letter prefix of s, ABA, okay, that does not match the 3-letter suffix of this s prime, okay? And then since we're looking for a proper prefix and suffix, right, because we need to back up by some amount, okay? We don't need to back up all the way, but we need to back up by some amount. So this is why you need to look for a proper prefix and suffix. Okay, so therefore you can't just say that AB is a suffix and a prefix of this s prime. Okay, we need a proper prefix and suffix. Okay, so then we find that the longest matching proper prefix and suffix of s1j is going to be equal to 2. All right, so then we can back up s by 2 letters, right? And then we can continue matching from this location over here. Okay, and you see that there's no need to match these 2 letters of s and t anymore because we already know that they match. Okay, now to do a bigger example, if you have s and t like this, right, then suppose that you actually matched 6 letters of s to t, okay? And now you get a mismatch on the 7th letter of s, okay? So then in order to know how far to back up, we're going to compute f of 6, right, because you match 6 letters. And then here you see that we're looking for the longest matching prefix and suffix of this s1j here, okay? And that's going to have length 4, okay? Because if you try to, we have shorter matching prefixes and suffixes, right? So for example, this AB matches this AB, okay? But we actually want longer ones because the farther you back up, right, the larger portion of s that you can skip. Right, so when you back up by 4 letters, then you can skip matching all of these 4 letters. Okay, and you can just continue with these 2 letters. Okay, so you want this matching prefix and suffix as big as possible, and you see that 4 is the biggest possible, because if you try to match 5 letters, right, then this is the length 5 prefix, but that's the length 5 suffix, which does not match. Okay. All right, so then basically, what we need to do is just to compute these f values, okay, this failure function. Okay, so let's just do a more complete example just to make sure that we're on the same page about this, okay? So again, the failure function is simply a function of s, okay? So regardless of what t is, we compute this failure function just on s itself, because all we need to know is that we matched some number of letters from s to some portion of t. Okay. All right. So so given s equals this letter over this string over here, right? We have that s f of 1. Okay, f of 1 is equal to 0, because we're looking for the longest matching proper prefix and suffix of s1. In order to compute this, we look for the match for s11. Okay, but s11 equals a. So therefore, there is no proper prefix or suffix of a single letter. Okay, next we have that we're going to compute f of 2. Okay, so f of 2, we're going to start with the first 2 letters of s. Okay, and then we're looking for a matching proper prefix and suffix. But here, the only prefix is a, right, and the only suffix is b, and they don't match. Okay, so therefore we cannot find any matching prefix and suffix. So f of 2 is 0. Okay, f of 3, right, we're going to take the first 3 letters of s. Okay, you look for a matching prefix and suffix, and that's just going to be the a, and the a matches this a. Okay, for f of 4, we're going to take the first 4 letters of s. Okay, and then the longest matching prefix and suffix is this ab here, matching this ab over here. Okay, f of 5, we actually have that, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but let's just do this f of 5 over here, right? Then you have that this prefix matches that suffix. Okay, so therefore f of 5 is 3. And then you can just continue computing the rest of this, and then eventually we get that, we compute these values for all, all prefixes of s. Okay, so s has 7 letters, right? So we're going to compute f from 1 to 7. Okay, and these are the values of f from 1 to 7. And again, these values tell us how much to back up each time we have a mismatch at one of these locations. Okay, so now we can use this, put this together into the KMP algorithm. Okay, so now the KMP algorithm is going to assume that your text is going to have length n, and then your pattern is going to have length m. Okay, and now suppose we've already computed this failure function. Okay, so later I'm going to show you how to compute the failure function. But right now, let's assume we have this failure function f, and let's see how we use it in the KMP algorithm. Okay, so this is the code for the KMP algorithm. Okay, so let's go through this code. So what is happening over here is that, we're matching certain letters of s and t. Okay, so I is the current letter in t, okay, that we're trying to match, and j is the current letter of s that we're trying to match. And initially, we're just trying to match the first letter of s and t. Okay, and we're going to go through a loop where we're going to go through all of the letters of s. We're going to go until either we reach the end of s or we reach the end of t. Okay, so while this condition is true, we're going to keep matching. And so we have several cases in this while loop. So the first case is that we're trying to match the ith letter of t and jth letter of s. And if there is a match, okay, if these 2 letters are equal, okay, then great, then we can move on to the next letter. Okay, so then we can go on to the I plus first letter of t, and then the j plus first letter of s. Okay. And otherwise, we have a mismatch. Okay, otherwise t of I does not equal s of j. Okay, so you have a mismatch, but then there are 2 subcases. Okay, so the first subcase is that if j is still equal to 1, okay, if j equals 1, then that means that we're still on the first letter of s. Okay, so the very first letter of s mismatched to the ith letter of t. Okay, in that case, we're just going to move on to the next letter of t. Okay, and we're going to try to again match the first letter. So we're going to keep j the same, right? So we're still going to match the first letter of s, but then to the I plus first letter of t. Okay, and the other case is where if j here is larger than 1, okay, so that means that we actually managed to match a few letters of t and s. Okay, we managed to match j letters of t and s. Okay, in that case, if we get a mismatch on the next letter, okay, then in this case we're gonna move j. We're gonna change j to f of j minus 1 plus 1. Okay, where this j minus 1 is this failure function that we computed. Okay, because what we said is that so we here you managed to match j minus 1 characters of s and t. Okay, but then you got a mismatch over here on the jth letter of s. Okay, so that means that what we saw was that if you manage to match this number of letters, then the amount that you want to back up by is f of j minus 1 letters. Okay, and then after backing up by that many letters, then we're going to continue the matching from the next letter of S, right, which is the f of j minus 1 plus first letter of S, right, and the ith letter of t. Okay, so this is why you change j to this f of j minus 1 plus 1, right, and then you do not change I. Okay, and then lastly, if you manage to hit, so if you manage to reach the end of S, okay, so if j equals n plus 1, then you matched all of S, right, then that's great, then that means that you found S in T, okay, and the location where you found S in T, right, the location in T where you found S is equal to I minus M, right, because you've reached location I in T, right, so the starting point for the match is actually I minus M. Okay. And otherwise, if you go through this entire while loop and you never reach the end of S, then that means that S is not in T. Okay, now we're gonna look at the complexity of this KMP algorithm. Okay, so to analyze complexity, let's define three numbers, okay, A, B, and C. So we have these three cases for the KMP algorithm. So A is just the number of times we run the first case. Okay, B is the number of times the second case executes, and C is the number of times the third case executes. Okay, so now we have a claim. So first of all, we claim that f of j minus 1 is less than j minus 1. Okay, because remember, what does f of j minus 1 mean? Well, it means that you match the first j minus 1 letters. Okay, so if you match a j, but then you got a mismatch on the next letter, on the jth letter. Okay, but in that case, if we get a mismatch on the jth letter, we're not going to jump back. We're not going to back up by j minus 1 letters. Right? Because if you back up by j minus 1 letters, then you're going to start the match between S and T at the same location again. Okay, so at most, you're going to back up by j minus 2 letters. Okay, so therefore, f of j minus 1 is at most j minus 2. Okay, so it's going to be less than j minus 1. Okay, so the next claim is that the number of times you run the first case plus the second case is going to be at most n. Okay, and the reason for this is that now you notice that I increases each time you run the first case or the second case. Okay, and then I never decreases, right? Because the third case does not decrease I. Okay, and the first two cases increase I. Okay, and then this loop runs until either I equals n or j equals m. Right, so therefore I can increase at most m minus 1 times before it reaches n. Okay, and at that point, we're going to stop the loop. Okay, so therefore, the number of times that the first or second case can run is less than n. Okay, the third claim is that the number of times the third case runs is no more than the number of times the first case runs. Okay, and this is because if you look at this all three cases, only the first case is going to increase j. Right here, you don't change j, and then here, what we said is that if you execute the third case, okay, so we know that this value here is less than j minus 1. Okay, so therefore, this value plus 1 is less than j. So whenever you run the third case, you're actually going to decrease j. Okay, and only the first case can increase j. Right, and if j equals 1, then we're just going to execute case B over here. Okay, so therefore the number of times that you increase j in case A, right, has to be at least as many times as you decrease j in case 3 over here. Okay, so therefore C is less than or equal to A. Okay, so once you have these three claims, then now we can show that KMP has order n complexity. Okay, because so the claim is that the entire loop, this entire while loop, is going to run for at most 2 times n times. Okay, because the number of times that you run the while loop is simply equal to a plus b plus c, right? Because every iteration you run one of these cases. Okay, exactly one of these cases. And then we know that a plus b plus c, right? So we know that c is less than or equal to a. Okay, so a plus b plus c is at most 2a plus b. Okay, but we know that but we know that a plus b itself is less than n. Okay, so then therefore 2a plus b is less than 2n. Okay, so therefore this KMP algorithm has order n complexity. Okay, now the only thing we're left to do is that we didn't say how to implement the failure function yet, right? So previously we assumed that we had the failure function. Okay, so now we're going to show how to compute the failure function, and we're going to do this in order m time, where m is the length of the pattern. Okay, so so the pattern S has length m, and we're going to compute all m values of f on S. And so this is the algorithm for doing this. Okay, and so let's go through this algorithm. Yeah, so I is the current position in S. Okay, so remember that we're trying to match a prefix. So we're going to take like a prefix of S. Okay, and given that prefix, you want to match a prefix of that prefix to a suffix of that prefix. Okay, so the first prefix of S we're going to consider is starting with I equals 2. Because we know that for I equals 1, right, there's just a single letter to the prefix, right? So f of 1 is always equal to 0, okay, basically. So therefore, we're going to start with f of 2, okay? And now, yeah, so I here is the current location, the position in S, and then J is the length of the longest matching prefix and suffix of S from 1 to I minus 1, plus 1. Okay, so therefore J is going to start from 1 here. Okay. All right, so so this failure function algorithm also has 3 cases. Okay, so the first case is that so what we have is we have let's see, yeah, so we have this S string over here. Okay, and then we are processing like this is I over here. Okay, so we're trying to find the longest matching prefix and suffix of S from 1 to I. Okay, so you want to find sort of you know, this part and this part such that these two are equal to each other. Okay, and now J here is so this is going to be letter J over here. Okay, and this is let's write this on top. Okay, and this is letter I over here. Okay, so if J and I are equal to each other, okay, right, in the first case over here, then we're going to set f of I to be equal to J, because what we have is that you know, if you consider the prefix of f of S up to this ith letter, right, then this part, right, the first J letters matches the last J letters. Okay, so in this case, f of I equals J, and then we're going to increment I and J. Okay. Otherwise, in the second case, if J is larger than 1, okay, then if you get a mismatch on the ith letter of S and the jth letter of S, right, then we're going to set J equal to this value over here. Okay, and then we'll see why on the next slide. Okay, and then otherwise, if J equals 0, if J equals 1, okay, in that case, you know, we couldn't even match like a single letter of I and J. Okay, and in that case, the longest match is going to be 0, right? So you set f of I to be 0, and then you move on to the next letter of S. Okay, so now we're going to talk about why in the second case you set f to be this this value over here. Okay, so what we have, so before we hit this case, right? So we managed to match. So before we reached J, we've already computed f of J minus 1. Okay, so that means that we managed to compute f of I minus 1, right? Yeah, we managed to compute f of I minus 1, and we found that this is equal to J minus 1, okay? Because we found that, you know, previously we were at this I minus 1 location over here, and we found that, you know, the first J minus 1 letters match the first J minus 1 letters match the last J minus 1 letters, but then you got a mismatch on this jth letter over here and this ith letter over here. Okay, but previously we've already computed this. Okay, so yeah, so that means that the first J minus 1 letters of S matches the last j minus 1 letters of before s of I. Okay, so let's sort of draw this out. Okay, so so the current situation is that yeah, so this is what we have. Okay, so on the previous iteration we were at this location. Okay, and you found that the first j minus 1 letters of s matched the last j minus 1 letters of s before this location s of I. But you found that these two values, these two letters do not match. Okay. All right, now let's give some names to these things. So let's call the first j minus 1 letters of s, let's call that u. Okay, and the last j minus 1 letters of the last j minus 1 letters before s of I, let's call that v. Okay, so then we know that u and v are equal. Okay, now if these two letters are not equal, okay, then what should we set f of I to be? Because remember that here we're trying to compute f of I. Okay, here we've already computed f of I minus 1, and we know that this is equal to j minus 1. Okay, and now we're trying to compute f of I. Okay, well, yeah, so the first, okay, so then we know that the first j minus 1, f of j minus 1 letters of s, okay, match the last f of j minus 1 letters before s of j. Okay, this is by the definition of f of j minus 1, right? F of j minus 1 is saying that, okay, let's take the first j minus 1 letters of s. Okay, what's the longest matching prefix and suffix? Okay, so now these two portions match, right? Let's call this part x, and let's call that part y. Okay, so x and y are equal. Okay, now we also know that the first j minus 1 letters of s equals this portion over here, equals this v over here. Okay, and so therefore, you know, these letters are equal to these letters. Okay, because u equals v. Okay, and also these letters are equal to these letters. Right? So therefore, these letters are equal to these over here. Okay, so then what we're going to do is, so then this tells us what f of I should be. Okay, because now we can try to match the next, let's erase all this stuff, okay? Right, so now we can try to match this letter, okay, this s, this f of j minus 1 plus 1, okay, that letter of s to s of I, okay? Yeah. Okay, so this is why in this case over here, right, we set j, okay, to be f of j minus 1 plus 1. Okay, because here we're gonna, after you get a mismatch between this letter and that letter, right, the next thing we're gonna try is we're gonna try to match this letter, okay, with that letter. Okay. All right, and if they match, okay, so let's set j prime to be this letter over here. Okay, so if they match, then we have that then we have that f of I equals j prime. Okay, and otherwise we're going to set, we're going to continue, we're going to compute f of j prime minus 1, okay, plus 1, and then we're trying to match s of I and then s of j double prime. Okay. All right. Now, one thing you want to make sure is that when you try to match this, you know, this letter over here with s of I, right, you don't miss a longer potential match between a suffix of s and a prefix of s. Okay. And so the reason this is true is because, well, we can make this claim that the longest matching prefix and suffix of s of 1i cannot be larger than f of j minus 1 plus 1. Okay? And the reason is that, you know, suppose for contradiction, there is a longer matching prefix and suffix of s of 1i. Okay? And suppose that's got length k, which is larger than f of j minus 1 plus 1. Okay? So what that would mean is that, suppose you actually have this length k suffix of s of 1i, right, matching this length k prefix of s. Okay, and suppose this k is actually larger than this quantity over here. Okay, in that case, what we have is that, okay, so if these two things match, right, if we have this match, okay, then we also have that, well, then we can just take out the final letter, and we have that, this part. Okay, so let's say that this has length k, right? But then you can just take out the final letter, and you have that, these k letters, sorry, k minus 1 letters, okay, also match. Okay, and then, okay, and then since u equals v, right, because we know u equals v, then we have that, this suffix over here, right, also exists over here in u. Okay, so there's also this this suffix in u over here. Okay, and this is also of length k minus 1. Okay, right, and so this suffix here would then be equal to this prefix over here. Right, and in that case, what we find is that we have a match of length k minus 1. Okay, between this prefix of f of j minus 1 and then this suffix of f of j minus 1. Right, we have at least a length k minus 1 match over here. Okay, and so that means that now if you're assuming that k is larger than this, right, then k minus 1 is going to be at least equal to f of j minus 1 plus 1. Okay, but now this is a contradiction because what we know is that the longest matching prefix and suffix of these first j minus 1 letters is only length f of j minus 1. Okay, and here the claim is that we actually can find a match of length f of j minus 1 plus 1. Okay, so that's a contradiction, and so that means that for this so that shows this claim. Okay. All right. Okay. So the final thing that we're going to figure out is the complexity of this to compute the failure function. Okay. And the analysis over here is similar to the analysis for the KMP algorithm. So we're going to look at the number of times we execute. So again, we have 3 cases in this failure function algorithm, and we're just going to look at the number of times you execute these 3 cases. Okay, so let's call those A, B, and C. All right, so the first claim is that A plus C is less than M. Okay, because you see that each time you run A or C, right, we're going to increase I. And then I gets to be at most M. Okay, so therefore A plus C is less than M. Okay, next, the claim is that B is less, the number of times you run the second case is less than number of times you run the first case. Okay, and the reason is that, when you run the first case, you increase J by at most 1. Okay, but when you run the second case, here J is going to decrease. Okay, because remember we said previously that f of J minus 1 is less than J minus 1. Okay, so whenever you run the second case, J is going to decrease. Okay. And then if J ever gets to be 0, then you're going to run the third case. Okay. So therefore, the number of times you run the second case is no more than number of times you run the first case. Okay, so then to put this together, we have that this failure function algorithm is going to have order m complexity. Okay, because the complexity is just equal to the number of times you run any of these cases. So it's equal to A plus B plus C. Okay, and then we know that B is less than or equal to A, so therefore this whole thing is less than or equal is less than 2A plus C, right? And then this A plus C is less than M, so this whole thing is less than 2M. Okay, so then so then what we found is that the failure function has order m complexity, and once you compute the failure function, then the KMP algorithm has order n complexity. So therefore, in total, to run the KMP algorithm, you have order n plus m complexity. Okay, so now before we finish, let's just do one complete example of this algorithm. Okay, so the algorithm, we start with S, and we need to compute the failure function of S. Okay, so so this, it turns out, is a failure function. Okay, and then next we're going to use this failure function in order to match S to T. Okay, so what we do is we start at the very beginning of S and T. Okay, so then you try to match these letters, and then you can match one letter, but then you get a mismatch on the second letter. So in that case, you're going to shift S back by f of 1, right? Because you only matched one letter. So f of 1 is equal to 0. Okay, so therefore, you're not going to shift S back at all. You're just going to continue matching from the next position. Okay, and so here, yeah. So then here, you try to match S and T, and you match 4 letters. Okay, but you're going to mismatch on the 5th letter, and so therefore you're going to match. You're going to back up S by f of 4. Okay, now f of 4 is equal to 2 over here. Okay, so you're going to back up S by 2 locations. Okay, so you're gonna put, sorry, yeah. Okay, you're gonna back up S by 2 locations. So you're gonna start over here. Okay, so you back up by 2 locations here, and then you can match 3 letters, right? But you're gonna mismatch on the 4th letter. So therefore, you're gonna back up S by f of 3, which is equal to 1. Okay, so therefore you back up by 1 location over here. Okay, and then you just keep going this way. Okay. And then eventually, at some point, you find that there is a match. Okay, and otherwise, if you reach the end of T and you don't find a match, then S is not in T. Okay, so now, yeah, now let's sort of summarize everything that we said. Okay, so we said that KMP takes order m plus n, right? And this is equal to order n, right? So now there are many other string matching algorithms. Okay, so for example, there's another algorithm called Boyer-Moore. Okay, this is also a order n time string matching algorithm. Okay, in fact, it works even better in practice, because in practice it often runs. It's not guaranteed, but oftentimes it runs in order n divided by m time. Okay. Now, both the KMP algorithm and this Boyer-Moore, they pre-process the they pre-process the pattern that you're looking for, okay, in order m time, right? And then they search the text in order n time, okay? And so so you can use these algorithms when you are when you're given both the text and the string at the same time, okay? Then you would use something like KMP or Boyer-Moore. However, sometimes you're given the text, right, the big string. Okay, sometimes you're given that ahead of time. Okay, and then you're allowed to do some pre-processing on that text. Okay, and then afterwards you get a bunch of little strings, little patterns that you want to search for in the text. Okay, so in that case, it's actually possible to search faster than order n time. Okay, because you can pre-process the text. And so examples of this would be, so for example, if you're searching for like, words in Shakespeare's plays, okay, well, you know Shakespeare's plays, okay, so you can pre-process them, and then after doing that, then you can search for words in these plays very quickly, okay. The time would be proportional to the length of these words, as opposed to the total length of the plays, okay. Another example is where, if you're searching for small portions of DNA in a large reference genome, okay? So suppose you sequenced the human genome, okay? So we're going to assume this is like a fixed string. So then you can pre-process that fixed string, and then you can search for small parts within that fixed string very quickly. Okay, so then how do you pre-process the text? Okay. Well, there are several ways. So, in the rest of this lecture, we're going to talk about one way, which is called suffix trees. Okay, so this is going to pre-process the text in order n time, and then after that, any string of length m can be searched in order m time instead of n time. Okay, and this is much, much better because, for example, the human genome would there n would be equal to 3 billion. Okay, but maybe you're looking for a snippet of length 100. Okay, so then now you can do this in 100 time instead of 3 billion time. Okay, now besides suffix trees, there are also other related data structures that can also pre-process the text and then search for strings very quickly. Okay, so for example, there are things called suffix arrays. Okay, there's like the Burrows-Wheeler transform and the FM index and many other data structures. So if you're interested in this stuff, you can go to this website, and this lists like a bunch of different string matching algorithms. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this suffix tree data structure. And again, this is where we can pre-process the text and then search for the strings in time proportional to the strings. Okay. Now, for these, I'm going to use the notes which are created by Ben Langmead. Okay, so he's a computational biologist at Johns Hopkins. And so he's actually got a bunch of very nice slides on, sorry, let me switch to a red pen over here, right? So yeah, so Langmead actually has a bunch of very nice slides on a bunch of computer science algorithms. Okay, so for example, mostly to do with string processing. And this is because, yeah, so you can go to this location over here, this website over here, right? And he's got a bunch of very nice lecture slides. And the reason he's so interested in these computer science algorithms is because when you do computational biology, you have to do lots and lots of things with string processing. Okay, so yeah, so this is actually one of the main applications for these string matching algorithms is computational biology. Okay, so you can go ahead and take a look at that website. All right, now before we talk about suffix trees, we need to start with something else, which is called suffix tries. Okay, so yeah, so let me introduce what these things are. So so first of all, there's a data structure called a trie. Okay, so this is so what this data structure does is that it lets you store a bunch of strings efficiently. Okay, so suppose you have 3 strings like this. Okay, you have instant, internal, and internet. Okay, and you want to store these all 3 strings together, and you want to do this efficiently. Okay, so the trie is a type of tree which allows you to store these strings. And the basic idea behind this tree is that it's going to look for sort of common subsequences in these strings, and then it's going to store them as a single path in the tree. Okay, so for example, you see that in all 3 words, we have all 3 words contain in. Okay, they start with in. Okay, so when we store these words, we're going to create a tree, and the first part of this tree is going to be these 2 letters in. Okay. Now you can also see that these 2 words. So then after this in part, then the next letter between these words are going to differ, right? So for example, some of them start with S, and then some of them start with T. So at that point, we need to make a branch. Okay, we need to make an S branch for the ones that start with S, and then a T branch for the words that start with T. Okay, now there's only a single word that starts with S, which is instant. Okay, so then we're going to make an entire branch just corresponding to instant over here. Okay, but for the words that start with T, there are actually 2 of those words. And furthermore, those words actually share a number of common letters. So for example, they share this part, right, the turn part. Okay, so therefore we're going to just combine the turn part in our tree into a single path. Right? We're not going to store the TERN letters twice. We're just going to store them as a single path. Okay, and we're going to keep going until we get to this letter where now these 2 words differ again in that letter. And when they differ, we're going to make a branch over here. Okay, so again, the way to create the trie is that if you have a bunch of words, okay, then you're going to look for like common prefixes. Okay, like for example, this this IM prefix. Okay, and then for these common prefixes, you're going to combine that into a single path in your trie. And then when you get to a letter which differs between these different words, okay, then you're going to make a split, right? And then you're going to continue on, and again, you're going to look for common prefixes like this TERN stuff, right? And then you're going to make that into a common path. And then when you get to a different letter or letter that differs, right, then you're going to do a split in the tree. Okay, and then lastly, you're going to label the final node, the leaf node, by which word you're talking about. Okay, so sorry, by the value of the word. Okay, so for example, if instant corresponds to value 1, and then internal corresponds to value 2, right? Then we can label the leaves that way. Okay, so yeah, so now so this is the pre-processing part. Okay, we're given a bunch of words, and then we pre-process these words to create this trie data structure. Now, after this pre-processing, if you let's see, so 1 second, yeah, so if you want to search for a word, okay, so let's say you want to search for a word, let's call this thing a key, okay, then this only and the key has length n, okay, then this only takes you order n time, because for example, if you want to search for the word instant, okay, right? So then all you need to do is just you take the first few letters of instant, right? And then you follow this trie, and you see that, okay, the first few letters match, right? But then once you get to the S letter, you need to decide which path to take. And because you're searching for instant, and the next letter is S, right? Then you're going to take the left path, and then you're just going to keep on following the paths until eventually you get to the end. Okay, if by the time you get to the end, you match the entire word instant, okay, then you found the word. Okay, on the other hand, if by the time you get to the end, you do not match the entire word, okay, so let's say that you're trying to match the word instance, okay, so then this would be like a CE over here, right, and then you don't have a match at the end, then, you know, then that word is not part of the set of words that you started with. Okay, now the other thing is that this trie, right? How big is it? Okay, well, it's equal to the total length at most, it's equal to the total number of letters in all the words that you were storing. Okay, so if you look at all of these words, right, all 3 words, okay, so in total they have some number of letters, and you can see that the number of nodes that you make in this trie is at most equal to the total number of letters. Okay, because for each letter you make, for each letter from any of these words, you make at most 1 node. Okay, so, all right. Yeah, so you can use this trie as an index. Sure, yeah, you can use it as an index. And then this is like some code that you can actually actually code up to actually implement the trie. Okay, now, besides the trie, there are, of course, other ways that we can store a set of strings. Okay, so for example, you can use something like a binary tree. Okay, so if you're trying to store a bunch of strings like this, right, then you can just sort these strings, right, and then you can pick one of the first letters as a splitting point, right. So if you want to implement this using a binary tree, you can pick one of the first letters as a splitting point, right? And then you can put all of the letters, all of the words whose first letters start with, whose first letter are less than I, you can put them on the left, and then all of the other ones which are larger than I, you can put them on the right. Okay, and all the ones which are equal to I, you can maybe, if you're going to make like a ternary tree, okay, all the letters which are equal to I, you can make that like the center child. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, but we're not going to use this binary tree. Okay, we're going to continue with this trie idea, and then but we're going to so the trie you need to to implement the trie, you need to start with a set of words that you want to put into the trie. Okay, so what is the set of words that we want to put into the trie? Well, the set of words is actually going to be suffixes. Okay, suffixes of the text, of the big text that we're trying to pre-process, we're going to put those words, okay, into the trie. All right, so I'll show you how this works, but before doing that, I want to mention that this idea of working with suffixes is actually very powerful, and it's used in many data structures. Okay, so for example, by working with suffixes, you can create the suffix trie. Okay, and then later on, we can improve the suffix trie to a suffix tree. Okay, so basically the suffix trie, it's a fast data structure, but it uses too much storage. And the suffix tree is going to use much less storage. Okay, and then you can further improve the suffix tree to a suffix array. So the suffix array uses even less storage than the suffix tree. Okay, it's somewhat slower than the suffix tree, but because these suffix trees can get to be very large, then it's actually necessary in some cases to reduce their size further. So we're going to just accept the time hit that we take, the hit on the running time, and then we would rather that they get smaller. Okay, so we're going to go for these suffix arrays. Right? And then there's also another data structure called the FM index, which can be even smaller than the suffix arrays. Okay, and all of these indices, these data structures, can implement the functionality of searching for a pattern, searching for a string very quickly from this text that you have. Okay, and in fact, they're much more powerful than that. So these data structures can not only search for patterns inside the text, they can also do many other operations, as we'll see. Okay, but all of this starts with this idea of working with suffixes. Okay, so just to remind you what these suffixes are, right? So suppose you start with this text, right, which is this big long black text over here, right? Then the suffixes are just anything that includes any substring that includes the final letter. Okay, so these are all of these suffixes, right? And if this text has length m, right, then in total we have about m squared over 2 letters in all of the suffixes. Okay, now it turns out that when you work with a suffix trie, okay, what you actually want to do is you want to insert a special letter, okay, this $, after the initial string, okay, and then you want to look for suffixes of the string with the $. Okay, and furthermore, the $, you're going to say that alphabetically this comes before all of the other letters in the string. Okay, so we're just going to create a special dollar letter, right? And this is alphabetically like the first letter. Okay, now the reason we want to add this $, okay, is in order to guarantee that no suffix is a prefix of another suffix. Okay, because after you add the $, right? So for example, if you take now this the suffix, right? This is not going to be the prefix of any other suffix, okay? Because for example, if you want this to be the prefix of this suffix, okay? Well, this is not possible because you see that within this suffix, you don't have any $ except for at the very end, right? This $, is a character that does not occur in this entire string, okay? It's a special extra character that we just created. So therefore, this $, only occurs at the very end of this suffix over here, okay? And so therefore, this string over here, right, cannot be a prefix of this string over here because if it was a prefix, right, then the $, would have to appear somewhere in the middle of the string, okay, which it does not. All right, so that's why we want to add the $, is to guarantee that no suffix is a prefix of another suffix. Okay, all right, so now we're going to build this thing called a suffix trie. Okay, so the suffix trie is going to start with a text t, okay, and it's going to append it with this $, okay, and then it's going to look at all possible suffixes of this t $, thing. Okay, so for example, it's going to look at BAA, $, right? It's going to look at AA, $, it's going to look at ABA, $, and so on. Okay, all of the suffixes, right? So this is going to be a set of words over here. And the suffix trie is going to place all of these words into the suffix trie using the algorithm that we talked about for placing a bunch of words into a trie. Okay, so in fact, this is the trie that the trie that you're going to get after inserting all of these suffixes. Okay, so for example, you see that in this trie, every suffix is a member of this. You can find every suffix in the suffix trie. Okay, so for example, if you look for this suffix ABA*, okay, so that is where is it? Okay, yeah, so that's right here. Okay, so this is this is stored in the suffix trie, right? If you look for this larger suffix BAABA, okay, so that's stored, as this path over here in the suffix trie. Okay, we also have, this path over here because one of the last suffix is simply the final letter of this t $, and that's just the $ itself. Okay, so that's also stored in the suffix trie. Okay, so again, the suffix trie is simply that you start with a string, right? You add the $, and then form all the suffixes, okay? And then you put all of those suffixes into the suffix trie. Okay, now so far we haven't said why this is useful yet, right? We simply said, like, how do you form the suffix trie, okay? Right. Okay. So now this page is actually saying, previously we said that the purpose of adding this $ is to make sure that no suffix is a prefix of another suffix. Okay. But why do you actually need this property? Okay. Well, the reason you need this property is that you see that in this suffix trie, right? After we add the $, then every suffix is a complete path from the root to a leaf. Okay, so for example, the ABA suffix, okay, that's going to be a complete path from the root to a leaf, okay, to this $ leaf over here. Okay, now if you don't add the $, okay, then this is no longer true. Okay, you no longer have that every suffix is a complete path from the root to a leaf. Okay, because for example, if you don't add the $ to t, right, then you still have these. So then these are going to be your suffixes, right, and then ABA, and then so on. Okay, and if you simply build a suffix trie from this, okay, then this is what you're going to get, right? But then you see that some of these suffixes are not paths from the root to a leaf. So for example, ABA here. Okay, well, ABA is part of this, it's on a path in the suffix trie, okay, but it's not, but it ends at this node, and this is not a leaf node, okay, and so the problem here is that you don't actually know that ABA ends at this node because it's not a leaf node, right, whereas in the previous suffix trie, right, we know that ABA is a suffix because it ends at a leaf node, okay, this is being marked by the $. Okay, so yeah. So this is why you want to add the $. Okay, yeah. So okay. So now once you build this suffix trie, okay, then we're going to start to see applications of the suffix trie, and we're going to see how you can actually use this to do string matching. So the way you do string matching is that we need. So this is one of the main observations. Okay. And what it's saying is that if you want to, let's see, I guess I'll just do the example. Okay, so now remember that the string we used to form this suffix trie was this thing over here. Okay, so this is our text, right? And then suppose you're trying to find a pattern, let's say BAA. Okay, so BAA is part of this text. Okay. And what you notice is that BAA here, right? Well, BAA occurs over here, okay, right? And now BAA here is actually a prefix of this suffix, okay? So if you take the suffix BAABA, right, then then a prefix of that is BAA. So that means that if you want to search for a pattern, okay, then this pattern has to be a prefix of some suffix of t. Okay, so this is one of the key observations. And so now using this observation, and then given a suffix trie, then we can quickly search for any substring. Okay, because now we just need to see whether the substring that we're looking for is a prefix of some suffix. And now remember that all of the suffixes of t, okay, all of them are stored in the suffix trie. So we just need to check whether our pattern is a prefix of any of these suffixes. So in order to check whether it's a prefix of any of these suffixes, okay, let's just go through this pattern letter by letter, and let's follow that path in the suffix trie. Okay, so the first letter is going to be B, right? So we're going to follow. So we're going to basically follow this blue path, right? We first follow the B letter, right? And then the next, so initially we have several choices. Okay, we could have followed A or B, but since we're the first letter we're looking for is B, we're going to take the B path, and then the next letter is A, okay? And then the next letter is A again, so then you follow the A path, okay? And so here, you see that you end up at a node. And when you end up at a node, then what that's saying is that, this path here, right, that we followed, right, actually is a prefix, okay? It's the initial part of some complete path, right? This complete path is a suffix. And so the portion of that path that we followed is a prefix of that suffix. Okay, you see that the complete path is simply BAABA over here, right? And the prefix that we followed is this initial part, the BAA part, which is exactly where this S occurs in T. Okay, so this is our algorithm. So given a suffix trie, this is our algorithm for finding a pattern in the string. Okay, which is that we're going to take we're going to take this pattern and we're just going to follow that path in the suffix trie for the text. And if we end up at a node, right, whether it's an internal node or a leaf, it doesn't matter. But if we end up somewhere in the suffix trie, then that means that the pattern is part of the text. Okay. On the other hand, if you if you fall off of the trie, okay, so let's see, all right, so before we talk about this other case over here, where it's not, where the S is not part of T, okay, let's just do another example where, right, so this other example, all right, so this is just looking for, well, the entire text, okay, so that's not very interesting. Okay, so here's an example where we're searching for something which is not in T. Okay, so here, again, T, if you remember, is going to be, what is it? A, B, A, A, B, A. Okay, A, B, A, A, B. A, B, A, A, B, A. Okay, and then, oops, S. Okay, and then S, let's say that the pattern that you're looking for is going to be this thing over here. Okay, B, A, A, B, A. B, A, B, B. Okay, B, A, A, B, B. Okay, so now this S is not part of T. Okay, and the way that you can detect that using the suffix trie is that, well, again, we're going to follow the path for S, okay, in the suffix trie. Okay, so initially you start with B, okay, that's fine, okay, then you go to A, B, okay, so everything's fine up to now. However, the next letter that you follow is going to be B, okay, and you see that there is no branch for B, okay, and so this means that this S is not a substring of T. Okay, because if it was a substring of T, right, then there would be, then this S would be a prefix of some suffix of T, right, and then that suffix, right, that suffix would create this B branch over here. Okay, and so the fact that there is no B branch over here implies that this S is not a prefix of any suffix of T, and so S is not in T. Okay, so all right, so okay, so there are some other okay, so we've seen how to search for strings, substrings, S in T. Okay, but there are other applications of suffix tries. Okay, so the suffix trie can actually do other things besides simply searching for strings. Okay, so for example, you can check whether a string S is a suffix of T. Okay, right, so here we're not looking for whether S is in T or not. We're looking for not only does S have to be part of T, we also want to make sure that S is a suffix of T. Okay, and the suffix trie can let you search for that easily. Okay, because for example, if you want to know whether BAA is a suffix of T, okay, then you're just going to follow the path for BAA. Okay, and you see that when you follow this path, you end up at a node, and this is not a leaf node. Right? And this shows you that BAA is not a suffix of T. Because if BAA was a suffix of T, right, then we know that by following, BAA would be actually one of the paths that's stored in the suffix trie, and that path would end at a leaf node. Okay, if S was a suffix of T, then S's path would end at a leaf node in the suffix trie. And here it does not end at a leaf node, so therefore BAA is not a suffix of T. Okay, BAA is contained in T, but it's not a suffix of T. Okay. On the other hand, if you search for this ABA here, okay. So remember the string was the string that we had was AB. What is it? AABA, right? AABA. Okay. So therefore, ABA is a suffix of T, right? And the way you can find that is the way you can detect that is when you follow the path for ABA, right? Then at the very end, you're going to end with a at a leaf node, right? You're going to end with this dollar node over here. Okay, so that tells you that ABA was actually one of the suffixes that was inserted into the suffix try. Okay, so now suffix tries can do more than just can do even more things. Okay, so in fact, you can even count the number of times that a string S occurs as a substring of T. Okay, so previously, right, we only wanted to find whether S occurs in T or not. Right? And using like KMP and Boyer-Moore, right, that was already hard enough. Okay, but now suffix tries are so powerful that they even let you count the number of times that this S occurs as a substring in T. Okay, so for example, this ABA substring, right, it actually occurs twice as a substring. Okay, so the string was ABAA, right, and so ABA actually occurs twice as a substring. And the way you can know that is that you're just going to do a search for ABA, okay? And the search just involves following the path for ABA, okay? So we follow this path, right? And then we end up at this node over here, and then you just need to look at how many leaf nodes are there in the subtree starting at this node, okay? So starting at this node, we have this big subtree over here, right? And there are 2 leaf nodes. Okay, so each of these leaf nodes corresponds to one of the occurrences of ABA in the text T. Okay, so for example, this path over here, right, which leads to this leaf node, that corresponds to the first occurrence of ABA, right? And the other path, right, corresponds to the second occurrence of ABA. Okay, so again, you just follow the path for this S that you're looking for, and then when you get to some node, right, you look for how many leaf nodes are below that point, and that's equal to the number of occurrences of that S. Okay, so longest repeated substring. Yeah, so I guess longest repeated substring just means a substring that occurs more than once. Right. Okay. So it's the deepest node with more than one child. Oh, okay. Right. So so the longest repeated substring is a substring of T that occurs more than once. Okay. So then you can just you look for the deepest node with more than one child, because if the node has more than one child, then it occurs multiple times in T. Right. And if you want the longest repeated substring, longest such string, then you just look for the deepest node. Right, the depth of a node corresponds to the length of the pattern S that you're looking for. Okay, so then this is how to implement a suffix try. Okay, so so we see that suffix tries are a very powerful data structure, right? However, and they're also efficient because again, to perform all of these operations takes time basically proportional to the length of the pattern, right? So for example, to find the pattern, right, you simply find the you simply follow the path for the pattern, okay, and that just takes time proportional to the length of the pattern, not the text. Okay. Likewise, to see whether it's a suffix, okay, again you just follow the pattern, so that time complexity is again proportional to the length of the pattern. Okay, and then if you want to count the number of occurrences, well then you need to count how many leaves there are, but that means that you follow the pattern. And then at that point, from that point, you need to count the number of leaves. So you can actually do this either by like a DFS starting from this node, right? Or you can keep some supplementary information in the nodes to let you do this counting quickly. Okay. So the point is that these suffix try data structures are already very powerful and very fast. Okay. But the main problem that they have is that they take a lot of room. Okay. So so now. The amount of storage that a suffix try requires depends on the text that you start with. So for example, if you start with this text, okay, let's say it's all just A's. Okay, in that case, the number of nodes is not too bad. Okay, so the total storage is basically proportional to m, because you have 2m plus 2 nodes, and each node requires being labeled with one of these letters. Okay, so the storage there is just linear in the length of the string. However, it's possible to create strings of length m where the amount of storage you need is actually quadratic in the string length. Okay, so here, for example, if you have a string of length m, right, consisting of two copies of, a bunch of copies of A, like n copies of A, and then n copies of B. Okay, then the claim is that you actually need something like n squared number of nodes in order to build a suffix tree containing all of the suffixes of the string. Okay, so as an example, right, if your T is here 3 A's and then 3 B's, right, so then you have one suffix, you have one branch for the all B's, right, and then for the for this suffix, right, ABBB, right, you have this one, right, and then you have for AABBB, right, you have another branch, right. So for each of these suffixes that contains any number of A's, you need to make a special branch for that suffix. Okay, and then if you add this up, it turns out that you need something like n squared number of nodes. Okay, and n can be very large, right? So remember that n sometimes, if we're talking about the human genome, n is like 3 billion. Okay, so you can't store 3 billion squared amount of storage. Okay, and not only is this like the theoretical words bound, people have actually done this in practice, and they saw that the size of these suffix tries actually does grow quadratically. Okay, so here, for example, you have a suffix trie for something which is only length 500. Okay, so this comes from the genome sequence for some sort of virus. Okay, and then so that genome only has length 500. Okay, so potentially the storage is 500 squared, right? 250,000. Okay, so now the top curve, this red curve, represents m squared. So this is like the theoretical worst case for the storage for a suffix trie. Okay, and then this blue line is like linear storage. That would be the ideal case. And the actual size of the suffix trie, you can see that it actually does grow quadratically. Okay, not quite as bad as m squared, but something like m squared over 2. Okay, so this is already way too much for the applications that we care about. And so that leads us to the final part of this lecture, which is suffix trees. Okay, so suffix trees are simply an improvement over suffix tries, and the improvement is that they use less storage. Okay, yeah, so suffix tries use too much storage, and so so now let's think about how we can make the suffix trie smaller. Okay, so the first thing we can do is that you notice that, so here we have a suffix trie for all of the suffixes of this, oops, let's switch to, yeah, okay. So here, these are all the, it's a suffix trie for this string over here, okay. And what you can see is that you have these paths where many of these nodes have only a single children, okay. And in that case, the first idea is just to, whenever you have a node with a single child, you're just going to merge all of these nodes. Okay, so for example, you're going to take all 3 nodes over here, right, and you're going to merge them together. Right, and so so that would produce, yeah, so that would, you actually have this stuff, okay? So you're going to merge all of these things together into a single node. Okay, so now instead of having 4 nodes over here, you merge all the letters on this path, right? The A, B, A star, and then you just make a single node corresponding to that path. Okay, so this is going to remove all of these. So if you do this, then this is the process that you perform, and then after that, you ensure that all of the nodes, except for the leaf nodes, are going to have at least 2 children. Okay, so you see that after you compress all of these paths, right, all the internal nodes have at least 2 children, whereas for the original suffix trie, many of the nodes have a single child. Okay, so now once you ensure that all these internal nodes have at least 2 children, right, then you can put a bound on the size of this tree, okay, because you know that the number of leaves, okay, the number of leaves just corresponds to how many different suffixes there are, okay, because every suffix corresponds to a leaf, okay. And so if your t is length m, then the number of leaves is going to be m. And so that means that the number of internal nodes, okay, because all these internal nodes have degree at least 2, then the number of internal nodes is going to be at most m minus 1. Okay, and so the total storage is going to be at most order m. Okay. All right, so this reduces the size of this tree. However, the storage is not, the total storage of the suffix trie, of this improved suffix trie, is still not order m yet. Okay, and this is because on these edges, we actually have to store these substrings. Okay, so if you look at the total length of all of these substrings that we're storing in this entire t, right? In this entire tree, then this is still going to be order m squared. Okay, so then next, the next idea to reduce the storage is that instead of storing this entire substring over here, okay, what we're going to do is just store indices so we have this original string, right? And all of these substrings correspond to substrings from this original string. And so therefore, we're just going to store where these substrings come from instead of the actual substring. So for example, this ABA star, okay, where does that come from? Well, that comes from over here, where you start with the letter indexed by 3, and then you go for 4 letters. Okay, so instead of storing ABA star, we're going to store this 3, 4 here, indicating that you start from this letter index 3, and then you go for 4 more letters. Okay, likewise, we have an ABA over here, right? And instead of storing that all 4 letters, we're just going to store 2 numbers. Okay, so here, it could have been like 1,000 letters. Okay, so if you store the entire substring, that would take you 1,000 storage. Whereas with this new format, where you just store the starting point and then the length, it's always going to have size 2. Okay, so therefore you see that by storing the offset and the length, right, we can greatly reduce the storage. Okay, so as another example on this BA here, okay, so this BA is going to start at at letter number 1, right, and it's going to go for let's erase this. Okay, so this BA here, right, starts at index 1 and it goes for 2 letters. Okay, so that's why you replace it with 1, 2 over here. Okay, so yeah, so if you so that's the example over here. Okay, so if you do this, okay, then now the space actually is going to be order m. Okay, because the total number of edges is order m. Okay, and on each edge you just have a constant amount of storage. So now we've reduced the storage to order m. Okay. Right. Okay. So some additional information you want to store is that you want to add these offsets. Okay. So these offsets are saying that, well, remember, so this path, what does this actually correspond to? So let's go back over here. Okay. So this path actually corresponds to ABA. Okay. So it corresponds to ABA over here. Okay. And so ABA actually starts at index 3. Okay. So therefore, over here in this path, right, we're just going to store the starting index. Okay. And likewise, this path over here, right, this corresponded to AABA. Okay. So if we go back over here, right, we see that this path over here corresponds to AABA. Okay. And so AABA starts at index 2 over here, right? Starts at index 2. Okay, and so therefore you're going to just mark this with a 2 over here. Okay. All right. Okay. So also, if you add up, so now remember that the second value in each of these pairs is the length of that substring. Okay. So therefore, if you take any path and you add up all of these second values, right, then you get a number which is equal to the length of the substring for that path. Okay, so what is the substring for this path? Okay, this red path. Well, let's go back over here, right? So the substring was this ABA star, ABA dollar. Okay, and that has a length of six letters in total, right? 2 and then 4. Okay, and then you see that if you just take the sum of the second coordinates of all of the nodes along that path, right, then you get 6, which is the length of that substring. Okay, and also that substring starts at index 1, right? Because if it's got a length of 6, then since the total, this entire thing T over here has a length of 7, then it has to start at index 1. Okay, so that is the suffix tree. Now, we haven't talked about how to build the suffix tree. Okay, so we saw that suffix tree is has order m storage. Okay, so suffix tree, you can build a suffix tree starting with a suffix trie. Okay, so we saw basically that process where you combine nodes in the suffix trie, and then you do a bunch of things, and then you arrive at the suffix tree. Okay, now it turns out that if you do this, it's actually quite slow to build the suffix tree. Okay, it takes order m squared time and also order m squared space. Okay, now there are improved methods. So for example, you can build what is it, a single edge? Okay, yeah. So you can sort of do this incrementally. So the second method is to do it incrementally, where you start with the biggest suffix. Okay, and then you you can change that tree to now include the second longest suffix, and then also the third longest suffix, and so on. And if you do that, then this is going to take you order m squared time, okay, and order m space. Okay, so it's less space, but it's the same amount of time. Okay. However, there is a much better algorithm to do this, which is called Yukonen's algorithm. Okay, so this was proposed back in the 90s, and this algorithm actually can build a suffix tree in linear time and linear space. Okay, so it's much better than the other algorithms, which were quadratic time. And here quadratic is very bad because, again, if you have the human genome, then m is equal to like 3 billion. Okay, so 3 billion squared and 3 billion, there's a big difference there. Okay. Now this algorithm, the Yukonen algorithm, is actually somewhat complicated. Okay, so we're not going to talk about this algorithm, but if you're interested in the details, there's this very nice book by Dan Gusfield. Okay, so this book is about a number of different string algorithms which are important in computational biology. And if you go look in chapter 6, then he talks about how to what this Yukonen's algorithm is. Okay. All right. So now we saw that suffix trees theoretically they have order m storage. Okay, and in practice they actually meet this bound quite well. Okay, so in practice, if you look at a string of length m, right, then of course the minimum storage you can use for that is proportional to m, right? And then here the yellow line is 2m, and the size of a suffix tree is, you see, between m and 2m. Okay, so this is very good, right? And if you compare that to a suffix trie, right, then this is horrible. Okay, so the suffix trie, even for a length 500 string, it needs something like 120,000 storage. Okay, whereas this suffix tree only needs something like, I don't know, like 800 storage. Okay, so now I'm gonna finish up quite quickly with this, okay, because we're running over time here. But basically, the suffix tree, you can do the same operations in the suffix tree as you can do in the suffix trie. Okay, so for example, if you're searching for a string s and you want to see whether that's a substring of t, okay, well then you can simply follow the path for s in the suffix tree, okay, and then if you end up at any node, okay, if you don't fall off the tree, then this s is a substring of t. Okay. You have to be slightly careful because when you're searching for like BAA, okay, then remember that these edges in the suffix tree actually correspond to multiple letters. Okay, so you need to search for given that this edge is is several letters, you need to check whether the first few letters of S matches that edge. Okay, whereas in the suffix trie, right, every branch was just a single letter. Okay, so there you could match letter by letter. Okay, whereas in the suffix tree, you have to match possibly multiple letters on a branch. Okay, and likewise, you can check whether string s is a suffix of t. Okay, it's the same method as the suffix trie, But again, you have to deal with these coalesced edges, okay, where an edge has multiple letters. Okay, yeah, so you can do the same thing. And then if you fall off, yeah, and then if you don't end up at an internal node, if you don't end up at a leaf, right, then it's not a suffix. Okay, you can also count the number of times that a string occurs in the text. Okay, again, the procedure is the same as for the suffix trie. Right, and then yeah, so then you can move to a node, and then you can do a DFS from that node. Okay, and then so the DFS is if there are k nodes below that point, so that means that there are k different matches, right? Then that DFS is going to take you order k time. So altogether, it's going to take you order n plus k time. N is the size of your pattern, and k is the number of occurrences of that pattern. Okay, yeah, so these are the time bounds for the suffix trie. Yeah, so I'm not gonna. So this is some particular application for biological application, which I'm not going to talk about. So the final thing I'll mention is that suffix tries are even more powerful than what we just saw before. So for example, you can actually build a suffix tree. You can actually build a suffix tree for several strings together. Okay, and then you can do things like look for longest common substring of multiple strings. Okay, so you can work with not just a single string, okay, but multiple strings, and you can solve problems like longest common substring, which previously we had to use a dynamic program to solve that, right? But now you can also use this method, and this is only going to take linear time. Okay, so the dynamic programming algorithm took quadratic time, right? And the way you do this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because we're running short on time. But basically, the idea is that if you have two strings x and y, okay, you're going to form one big string, which is just the concatenation of x and y. Okay, so you're going to start with x, okay, but then you need to separate it. So we're going to put a separator, right? And the separator is going to be just some special letter that does not occur in x. Okay, so let's just make up a letter like this hash mark. Okay, and then that separates x and y. And then at the end of y, we're going to put another special letter, the $sign. And then given this this string, okay, the x hash y dollar, we're just going to build a suffix tree on this string. Okay, and if you build a suffix tree, this is what you're going to get. Okay, so you see that some of these suffixes are going to contain parts of both strings. Okay, so for example, this one contains the final letter of x and then all of y. Okay, now to make this a bit more readable, what we're going to do is whenever it contains both strings, okay, then we're just going to not show the second part of that string. Okay, we're not going to show the second string. Okay, so for example, we're just going to sort of get rid of all of these parts of the second string over here, right? And that's going to lead to this sort of cleaner image over here. Okay, but it's got the same information because whenever you see one of these hash marks, you know that what follows is the rest is this y star here. Okay, you know that this is going to follow. Okay, so now what you can do is now you can label all of these internal nodes. Okay, and you can label them with whether they contain leaves that come from both strings. So for example, this node over here, okay, well this contains a leaf that comes from, that contains a hash mark. So that means that this leaf comes from the x string. It also contains a node that only contains the dollar mark. So that means that this node only comes from the second string y. Okay, so therefore this node over here, right, because it's got leaves that come from both x and y, we're going to label it by xy. Okay. On the other hand, you have some nodes which only come from x. Okay, so for example, this node, right, it doesn't have any leaves that end with $sign. So that means that all of the prefixes over here, right, they only are prefixes of x. Okay, and it's true that they contain all of y at the end, right? However, the prefix itself, okay, this part, okay, only comes from x. Likewise, if you look at this node over here, right, these prefixes do not contain the hash mark. So all these, what am I saying? I'm saying prefix. I should be saying suffix. Okay, yeah. So sorry. These suffixes all come from y. Okay, so therefore you can label all of these, so starting at the bottom of the tree, okay, you can label all of these internal nodes as to whether their suffixes only come from x or from y or from both x and y. And then once you label this, then you can move up the tree, and so this label would basically be equal to the OR of these two labels. Okay, so this is labeled xy because one of its children is labeled xy. And then so you can just sort of move up the tree like this, and you can label all of these nodes as x and y. Okay, and now in order to find the longest common substring of x and y, then what you can do is you can move to the node with the greatest depth. Okay, such that the label is still xy. Okay? If you move to this node, then because it's got the greatest depth, it's going to be a long string. And because the node is labeled by both x and y, then this means that this very long string occurs in both x and y. Okay, so in fact, if you move to the node with the deepest depth that is still labeled by xy, then this is the longest common substring of x and y. Okay, and and remarkably, this only takes order x plus y amount of time and space. So if you compare this to the dynamic program that we talked about earlier, which I think you guys talked about earlier, right? That took quadratic. That took x times y time and space, right? So this very powerful data structure, the suffix tree, okay, can solve not just these string matching problems, but also this LCS problem in linear time and space. Okay, yeah, so suffix trees are used in practice very often. Okay, there are many applications for suffix trees, especially in computational biology. And the final thing I'll say is that there's ways to improve even on the suffix trees, okay? Because suffix trees, even though they use linear storage, right, there's some sort of constant hidden in that big O, okay? And the constant is not large, but it's not small enough for real-world applications either. Okay, so for example, it turns out that in this very optimized implementation of this program called Moomer, right, you need about 16 bytes per single letter of the human. So this Moomer thing is a suffix tree built on the human genome. Okay, so the human genome has a bunch of these nucleotides, A, T, C, and G. Okay, and it turns out that the suffix tree needs about 16 bytes per nucleotide. Okay, now the nucleotide is just A, T, C, or G, so there's only 4 possibilities. So in principle, you could represent this with like 2 bits, okay, as opposed to like, what is this, like 64 bits over here. Okay, and in fact, if you build a suffix tree over the human genome, using this method, it's going to be more than 45 gigabytes. And this is actually a very optimized suffix tree. Okay, so this shows that suffix trees, they still take too much space. Okay, especially if you want to run this, for example, on a GPU or something, which only has like 12 gigs of storage, okay, of main memory. Right. So so there are even more compact data structures than suffix trees. Okay, so for example, there are suffix arrays, and then even more compact than suffix arrays, there are things called like the FM index. Okay, so they again support these text search operations similar to suffix trees, but they are even smaller. Okay, in terms of this constant factor over here.